So, hello and welcome to the new world. I am your host Gauri Shri Krishna Kumar, and today we have with us an interesting and a very surprising guest, Mr. Robert Jestic. So, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, again, my name is Bob Jestic. I'm in New York City, and I'm very happy to be here on your show.
Yes, thank you. So are you a police officer, an ex-police officer?
Yes, I'm retired from the New York City Police Department.
Oh, I see. So you're retired. So what happened? What made you initially aspire to go into the course of, the police department? Like, was there any certain things you wanted to do as a police?
I think I didn't come from a background of family with police because in many instances that can be a motivation. You could have a father, a grandfather, an uncle. I didn't have that. I all of my experiences throughout my youth and early adulthood were always positive with police. I always looked at police as a people and a force that were there to help and were help. You know, a lot of things unfortunately have changed nowadays, but I always was told, and I always told my kids that if you were in trouble, look for a policeman or a police woman, and so I always looked at police as something good, and I aspired to do that so that I could help in the city.
So you wanted to do good and make a change in the community.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, this might sound a bit cynical, but do you believe that you have actually created a change in the community? Like, do you believe that you have done something that'll help you and the others?
Um, it's funny you use that word cynical because that is a word that unfortunately pops up much too much in policing. And
Mhm.
because the police profession I have found is just a breeding ground for cynicism. And I think its roots are in just what you're saying is that do you think you're really making a change? And it's very hard to see that in a city as vast as like New York City, that one person can make some kind of a change. And
Yes, I
uh,
definitely believe so.
yeah, and a lot of times police officers end up seeing people at their worst. Whereas a person might be a wonderful person when they're not, either 24 hours before or 24 hours after they're dealing with that police officer. But while they're under the influence of drugs, alcohol, fear, rage, um, they're acting at their worst, and the police officer gets to deal with that person at their worst. And sometimes it's the forces from without, and sometimes when a police officer feels that they're not being backed up from the forces from within, the management within the department, this cynicism can very, very easily breed in within a cop who says, what's the use? Why am I out here? What am I, what am I accomplishing? So it is difficult. It's a difficult question you've asked. It's difficult to say, can one person make a change, especially in a large municipality?
I completely believe that I think one man can make a lot of difference if you set your mind to it.
Mhm.
Because if you focus on one thing, then I really believe that you can do something good, not just to like the community or something. You can do good to yourself, in fact. So,
Sure.
so you really love the job, right?
Um, yeah, I didn't really ever think about, and I don't know what else I would have done. And I've even, stayed where I've written about it, and I also still work in the same type of industry. I'm in my office right now. I'm the chief security officer in of a government agency. So, even though it's not, public law enforcement, I'm
Hmm.
still, and I'll finish my working life in this type of field.
Yeah, that's amazing that you still follow it because not just you like it, but you feel like you want to do more than this. It's really amazing. And okay, so tell me, so you how long have you been a police officer? Like,
I was with the police department for 20 years. That is the basic time that a person is with the department, and at least in New York City, and qualifies for what's considered at that time was considered
mhm.
full retirement. So you get your full pension after you've worked 20 years.
Oh, okay. So during those 20 years, were there any instances or more like situations where you felt that, oh, I feel this as something totally different? In that situation, you had to like almost probably face your fears. Were there any such situations like that where you had to face your fears? Because being a cop is not an easy task. Because,
No, there were plenty of times with that, and some of them you knew you were going to be facing it, and some of them were just happened instantaneous. Somebody who, and I wish I could give proper credit to it, but somebody when I was a very, very young cop, and it might have been still when I was a recruit in the academy, summed up police work in saying that it's 90% boredom and 10% terror, where most of the time it's just routine, and it could frankly be boring, and but then all of a sudden the light switch gets turned on and it's
mm-hmm.
10% sheer terror. And there were times that you knew you're getting into. I mean, for instance, I worked in the narcotics division for a
Oh,
while,
yeah.
and in that case you're executing warrants. You're going with an entry team to actually hit a door of a building or a house and enter to where there's drugs, there's money, there's guns, and so that there's a chance for some type of violence there. Other times, things happen when you're in uniform patrol. Things happen just at the spur of the moment. Somebody gets hit by a subway train, and all of a sudden, you don't realize it, and 2 minutes later, you're underneath that train trying to help someone whose leg is cut off, and the power is still on. The electrified third rail is a couple of feet from you. So it's again, that's what the job was filled with. Not thankfully, not on a regular basis, but there was always the chance that at any instant something was going to happen that was going to be raise anybody's fears.
Mm-hmm. So what? Okay. So what do you feel like in such moments, and how do you think you helped yourself to overcome those moments? Because I'm saying if I was in that position, let's say I would not be that strong. I feel I would not be that strong easily.
Um, that's a hard question. I think I don't know if it's something you can really train for. I
Yeah.
found that I always, at least I always thought one of my most positive attributes, and that was especially as I went up through the ranks, because I retired as a captain. So I had gone sergeant, lieutenant, and retired as a captain. And I always thought, at least from my own opinion, was that I was always thinking clearest and at my best when the situation was the most tense. It's the crisis sort of brought clearness to me, and that's what I always thought was a very positive trait. I don't know why, but I just seem to be able to assess a situation and make a decision. May
Mm-hmm.
not always be the right decision, but I was always to make a decision when the situation was very tight. And if you're asking me how to do that, I don't know. I really don't know, but that's just me.
Because if that's possible, that's really amazing. Because for certain people, it's really different. So like, let's say if I was talking about myself, I don't think I would be that strong easily unless I'm pretty used to it, which also happens to some people. Were you like kind of used to it at this point? Because like 20 years seems really a lot, and like you've reached captain at that point, like upgraded your stages.
Yeah, I don't think anybody gets used to it, and
Mm-hmm.
also, I don't want to mislead into saying that, there were many other police officers that had a lot more, street experience, let's say, than I did.
Mm-hmm.
I probably did, if I counted them up, I did probably half my career out on the street. I also was, I was an academy instructor for, and involved in training for several years. So, I certainly had my time out on patrol, but there were a lot of other people that had a lot more of these harrowing experiences than I did.
Mm-hmm. So, well, okay, what would you say will be a normal day for you at the NYPD? So, what do you say? What would you do for like a normal day?
A normal day on patrol, and also I should explain too that with the NYPD, when I first came on the job, I was a transit cop. There was, for most of the latter part of the 20th century, the New York City was policed by three separate departments. You
Mm-hmm.
had the NYPD, but then you also had the transit police and the housing police. Now,
Yeah.
all three departments, they had the same rank structure, the same uniforms except for the patches, the same pay and benefits, but they were separate departments. I came on the job as a transit police, which meant it was responsible for policing the subway system in New York. The
Mm-hmm.
housing police policed the public housing projects in New York City. So I did my time as a patrol officer in the subways. So when I was patrolling, it was normally a typical day would normally be on foot, would normally be alone without a partner, and would be um, patrolling, whether it was a small, large station, or several different stations, and you would be handling what would be considered post conditions if there had been, let's say, pickpockets or bag snatches reported in certain locations and times. You'd make sure you were visible at those locations and times. There, you would do specifically with transit. There was a thing called revenue escorts where when there were tokens still being used in the subway system in the booths, they would have full-time and part-time booths where the clerks would have to move money and tokens from one booth to the other side of the station to another. So there'd be a uniformed police officer that would escort that clerk along with the
Oh.
money and tokens. And then it was just handling whatever happened. If somebody was sick or injured, you'd render aid, you could prepare the report. Crime was committed, you'd take a crime report, you would make an arrest if there was probable cause to arrest the perpetrator there,
Mm-hmm.
and spend a lot of the days giving directions to people, giving counsel to people, people who were upset
Mm-hmm.
just about maybe the fact that a staircase that a person had used every day for 20 years was now closed off and had never been closed off before. And that person now was in a complete state of panic because they couldn't realize that if they just went up the stairway to the left, that they'd just be on the other side of the street. But they were in a panic because they never did that before. They only used one stairway every day. So just having to reassure and comfort people in a lot of situations.
Yeah, that it's so it was like a standardized routine, you would say.
Yeah, and then you had to patrol your entire post. You had to make entries in a memo book that, where you were and what you did
Mm-hmm.
at certain times of the day.
So, from a transit cop and to after a few years, I mean more than a few years, you became a captain of the NYPD, the New York Police Department.
Yes.
How would you describe or like say, how did you feel when you started getting upgraded to these different stages? So from transit cop to like an officer, then from there moving on to the next step. So like with that comes more responsibilities as well, because the higher the position, the more responsibilities. So
Sure. And also with each rank, I realized, sometimes saying, geez, that like when I made sergeant, then all
mm-hmm.
of a sudden I realized how, well, geez, being a police officer really isn't that hard because all the responsibility falls on the sergeant. And then when I made lieutenant, I said, geez, being a sergeant isn't that hard because all the responsibility falls on the sergeant. And the same thing with captain. And all of those appointments are based on in New York City at least, are based on civil service tests. You take an actual exam, a test, and you get, based on how you score, you get put on a list, and you get appointed from that list as vacancies come up. So yeah, it was a big thrill at the time when all of a sudden you start making these ranks, and now all of a sudden I'm a sergeant, got all this more responsibility, now a lieutenant, and then finally, really, hard to believe that at one point saying, geez, when I was a cop, it was like a captain was some type of god. You just heard about the captain, you hardly ever saw him, and now all of a sudden I am, one of those captains.
So like when you became captain, would you say that you looked back to when you were like a transit cop or say an officer and been like, oh my God, I should have never done that step. Like now I know better. So like, I don't think I should have done that before in the past. Have you ever thought of that?
Yeah, I think that you always need to learn from your mistakes. And
yes, definitely.
you don't want to, I think it's a mistake to look back too much. You always should be looking forward, but you always want to learn from your mistakes, because as they always say, history repeats itself, and you always want to take, like, that's what I always, in going through the ranks, I always tried to take, I tried to emulate. There were always, like when I was a police officer, there were always sergeants. There were sergeants who I thought were tremendous supervisors, and there were sergeants that I thought were not lousy supervisors. And the same thing when I was a sergeant, looking up at lieutenants, and lieutenants then looking up at captains. And I always tried to take something and emulate something from the like when I became sergeant, try to emulate some of the traits of some of these sergeants that I looked up to. And of course, you can only be yourself, but always try to take some of those good characteristics and say, I want to try to be like this, and to not, and remembered some of the things that, I'll just give you a quick example. When I was a police officer, one of the first few arrests that I made, I even forget what the arrest was for, but what sticks out in my mind is, and I don't know why you would know this at all, but the paperwork, especially at that time, for all I know, it might be a lot more streamlined now, but the paperwork at that time, we're talking about in the 1980s, for making an arrest in New York City was ridiculous, with how much paperwork there was, how many different forms there were. And, like anything else, once you started to get used to it, then it became easier. But for somebody that wasn't familiar with it, this could be a very daunting task. And I remember, here I was a young cop, I was in the command now, my prisoner was lodged in the cell, and I'm starting to do all this paperwork, and every time I would finish, you'd have to bring the paperwork to a desk officer, a sergeant or a lieutenant, who would approve it, and then you could move on. And every time I would bring this paperwork, this package, up to this desk officer, there was a lieutenant that was on the desk at the time. He would look at it, he wouldn't say a word, he would just say, not correct, and throw it back at me. And wouldn't say what wasn't correct about it, wouldn't say anything. And I would take it, and I was actually too scared to say, well, what's exactly wrong? I would bring it back into the prisoner processing area. I would, and there was nobody else. There was nobody else in there processing an arrest at the time that I could ask for any help. I would go back, try to dot another I and cross another T, and go back later on. And again, he would just throw it back, no good, and just, look down again and start writing. And this went on and on. It was, it was a very embarrassing situation. Finally, somebody else came in with an arrest, and I asked, I said, and he showed me what was wrong. But that was one of the things that I made up my mind. I was never, when I was on the desk, I was never going to do that to anybody. I was going to bring people over and say, look, you have to do this, you have to do that. And, so again, you learn from good experiences and bad experiences.
Yeah, man, I really wanted to know what was wrong with the paper. Because honestly, again, just saying no, it's wrong without even like properly checking it, I guess it's really embarrassing for the others. If you think what you said was true, it's really embarrassing for the others. So yeah, believe you've changed yourself in like lots of way.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely.
And it all comes with maturing too,
Yeah.
maturing in each rank.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So now you said you're an ex police officer. What
Yes.
happened? What happened at that stage when you said, no, I don't feel like doing this anymore?
It's not so much as not feeling like doing it anymore. This is something that I just had always had as a plan, because one of the way I always looked at it is one of the main benefits that the NYPD had that not a lot of occupations and industries had was the ability to be able to retire after 20 years, and not only retire after 20 years, but there are some agencies where you can retire after 20 years, but then you still have to wait till you're either 55 or older in order to collect your pension. With the NYPD, you could retire after 20 years, collect your pension, and basically start a whole new career.
Life,
So
yeah.
I just looked at that as being one of the biggest benefits. So my plan from day one was to work 20 years and then retire. So
Then
I was
go.
just continuing out the plan I had always started.
Yeah, that's great. So then now you're still working as the chief security officer, right?
I'm working there, and I'm also I'm an adjunct college professor. I teach classes in physical security in the criminal justice department of a college that on Long Island.
What made you take that turn? Like, what made you feel like, oh, I want to do this as well?
Oh, that see, with that, that was easy, because one of the things that for me I found was a quality that I never realized that I could be in any way successful at was the idea of training, public speaking, and teaching, because I always, and to this day, I'm a shy person. With, like, if I'm in a room and there's a group setting, you have a training class or something where you have 15, 20 people in there, I will be the last person to raise my hand to volunteer any
Oh,
information. And I've always been that way, and I still am. And it was strange that when I had an undergraduate degree when I joined the police department, and at that time you only needed a high school diploma to get onto whether it was transit or NYPD, and I was getting kind of some good-natured ribbing from friends and family to say that, geez, you kind of wasted your college degree and became a cop, didn't you? And so I was looking for some way to say, well, prove they weren't right. And I was on the job for a few years, about 4 years, I think it was. And there was a department bulletin that said that they were accepting applications for police academy instructors. And the only requirement was that you did have a college degree. So I submitted for
oh,
it. I said, here, my
yeah,
college
here's
degree is
my
going to be
college
good for
degree.
something. And I went through the interview process and everything, and I got assigned. As I said, I spent a couple of years as a recruit academy instructor. Even though I was still transit, they would detail transit cops to the NYPD Academy because all the recruits trained together. And so I was a recruit instructor. I then worked as in various levels of training. I went back to the academy for a little while as a sergeant. As a lieutenant for a little while, I was in charge of a unit in the transit police before there was no more transit police that dealt with in-service and promotional and specialized training. So I really started to grow very fond of the training environment. And as I went along, right after I left the police department, I wanted to pursue teaching at the college level. And I realized that the barrier to that was going to be that I needed at least a master's degree to do that. So I finally, several years ago, I finished a master's program. And since that time, I've been an adjunct at a couple of local colleges, and I really enjoy the undergraduate atmosphere.
So then, did you learn anything there as well? Because you're teaching like hundreds of people, I presume, or more than that.
Well, I mean, over the time, I've taught, hundreds of people. Yeah, of course, you never, I mean, life, you never stop the learning process until you're not here anymore. It's, everything that happens is a learning process. Right now is a learning
Yeah, it
process.
is definitely.
Yeah.
So this actually, we had actually asked one of our, viewers to, if they wanted to ask any questions to an NYPD officer, and this was actually like a really big gun, but I'm gonna ask it. So the question was, so not just the lockdown. By the way, the lockdown has really like made our lives not nasty, but like it has really made our lives very difficult. And during these times, there we've seen like a huge uproar of like racial discrimination. I mean, I'm not just talking about the lockdown itself, because it's prevalent like anywhere, like in every single world. So it's not just the lockdown, but we've like recently seen, right, that there's this huge uproar of discrimination. So the question was, do you think that you can change it from where it is right now, or do you think that you have to like revamp it from the beginning, so and make a whole new plan?
You see, that's a very, very complex question,
I get it.
or very
I get it.
no, it's an easy question. It's a very complex answer. I don't think, and this is just my own personal opinion, I don't
sure.
think that the way that it's being addressed now is the right way to do it. What is the right way to do it? I'm not sure. I mean, racism, discrimination has existed, and to a degree, I've been naive to say it's not always going to exist to some extent. People are always going to have biases and prejudices, and unfortunately, in many instances, they're very negative biases and prejudices. But by defunding police, is that something that is going to positively attack it? I personally, I don't think so. By tying the hands of the police and not letting the police police, is that going to positively address it? I don't think so. What will? If I knew the answer to that, maybe I would be in some kind of decision-making capacity in the municipal government. I'm not quite sure of that, but I can have my opinions like anybody
Yes, you
else,
can.
and I just don't think that as it's being addressed right now is having any really positive impact.
Yeah, it's actually really true. So then, what would you say? I mean, along with your, entire like 20 years of experience in the NYPD, what would you say, like while you were working as well, what would you say, or what will you want to change in the system? Like, let this just be like when you were working. Were there any changes? Were there any changes or systems in the system that you wanted? Like any changes in the system that was prevalent during your time?
You see, the changes in the system that I would be talking about would more be internal, that to again allow kind of more in a way I would have liked to have seen the police department become more like the way that the military has gone, to where there's decision-making capability that is given at a local level, whereas now in a battlefield situation, the ranking officer, whether it be a non-commissioned officer or whether it be a lieutenant, has decision-making capabilities right there, and doesn't have to run that decision up the line. And in many instances, what I always thought that the police department had devolved into, and unfortunately, from the outside looking in right now, I think it's just gotten even worse than that, is the fact that the police officer on patrol doesn't really appear to be able to make any decisions at all. something happens, and I don't blame them either, is that something happens, they don't want to end up getting in trouble and doing the wrong thing. They call a sergeant to the scene. The sergeant gets there now, and it's like, well, wait a minute, I'm not making this decision. I'm getting a lieutenant there. And then it works its way right up. I mean, I think there should be a lot more decision making at each level.
So then was all of this like, prevalent during your times?
It was prevalent, and it's something I want to change, but I think it's gotten, instead of getting better, it's gotten worse.
I see. So then, okay, so then what would you say was the most important step during your entire years as a police officer? What would you say was your most important step?
My personally, or what I saw happen with the department?
I mean, it could be personally and professionally.
Well, professionally, without a doubt, the most important step during my career was the fact that you had that police merger take place, because you went from having 3 police departments where there was many areas where there was duplication of function to one department. And it certainly didn't end up being a perfect setup. And there were a lot of people, including myself, that really weren't that. I was very happy being with the Transit Police Department and wasn't all that happy with what we all called the hostile takeover. But in the end of the day, it certainly made a lot of sense to say that at least administratively now you have one police department in a large city like New York, instead of having 3 separate entities operating independently, in that same geographical area. So that police merger was the probably the most significant thing that happened during my career.
Yeah, so you were saying the personally and professionally, the most important thing in your...
Yeah, it was that police merger.
The merger?
When all 3 departments became one.
So then there was like that sense of unity, you mean?
I don't know if I would say a sense of unity. I think cops, cops always got along, whether it was you were transit, city, or housing. There was, some good-natured rivalry, but they always, by and large, got along. But I think just as, the effectiveness of an agency, it was, you could have a situation where, something was happening underground in a subway station, and right upstairs, there was a police in a car that didn't know what was going on right downstairs because it was a separate department on a separate radio frequency. And again, that all wasn't solved overnight with the merger, but it started going in the right direction there.
Okay, so now your job is as the chief security officer, right? So yes. Along with that, you're also teaching as a professor.
Yes.
So how do you feel about struggling both of those? Because I know you have your job to do, but then you also have the classes. Do you have any difficulties managing both of them?
Not really, because as an adjunct, I only do 1 class a semester. So I'm either doing, and it's at night, I either do 2 nights or 1 night. The biggest challenge with this has been during the pandemic, and this, thankfully, it looks like, we're coming out of it. And in September, I'm going to be they told me I'm going to be back to full-time in the classroom. But doing remote classes, originally, I thought that online remote classes would be very, very easy. But it's just the opposite. It's a lot more challenging because in doing the testing and doing project presentations, and doing it just is. It's a lot more challenging, and yeah. I'll be happy to get back into the classroom.
Yeah,
but again, this semester, my class is a 1 night a week, so it's not, as far as time goes, it's not an issue for me to have to be able to go out to the campus on Wednesday nights, once a week.
Yeah, I totally am on your side with that, because the online classes are way too disturbing for literally everyone, because there's so many distractions and everything. It just totally eats you up alive. So along with the professor, and having a job in the government facilities. I have also heard you're an author.
Yes.
So what kind of books do you write?
Um, I write again. I read something somewhere, and I want to say I might say it might have been Mark Twain, but I might get this wrong. But it might have been Mark Twain that said, "Write what you know," and so I write what I know, or at least what I think I know. And so my books have to do with policing. My books have to do with crime, mystery, and my books also always have some type of a humorous slant to them because that was where I started writing, because I think that one of the biggest traits that just about all police officers share is this sense of humor that I think it's a byproduct of the job, in that you see, like I said earlier, you see people at their
Yeah.
worst, and it's this kind of sense of humor that even sort of as a defense mechanism kind of has to develop in order for you to be able to maintain and manage that stress that will develop naturally on the job. So I've written um, I've written several nonfiction books that kind of walk through my career. I call them Dark Nights, and it's Dark Night series because, meaning a night being the metaphor for a police officer, but
Yes.
dark meaning how a lot of the humor is dark humor. It's things that maybe the average person might not consider all that funny, but it's in the proper context. In a police environment, it's found very funny. And so I have had those books. I have a few mysteries that I've written and those are New York based, where it's that's the setting is always in the New York City area. And I have some fictional books with involving police work also.
Yeah, I'm so into mysteries and thrillers, so I think I'll be reading all of these soon. So, wait, so are any of these stories actually like your personal life experiences? Like, for example, one story is about a case from your times. Is there anything like that?
Oh yeah, yeah. I have several of the books of that. Actually, the first book that I wrote is called C Case, C hyphen case, and that's about the 2 years that I did working in the Internal Affairs Bureau of the NYPD as a lieutenant, and that actually the whole book is just kind of chronicling the cases, some of the cases that I had during that 2 years.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. So, are you going to be writing any books in the future? Like, are you writing anything soon about
Yeah,
your extra
one of the
works?
things, it was like when I started writing, for some reason it was like kind of turning on a faucet, and I can't turn that faucet off. I just keep writing. I've probably got over 20 books now published, um, and yeah, I just keep, like, what it is with these
Mhm.
books. Some of them are in series, so I just keep adding to the
Just keep
series.
writing.
Yeah.
So, when did you start writing? Like, when did you decide to do the first ever book?
I started writing a book many years ago, but like, I guess, like, like most cops, they think they have a book in them, and I was no different. But um, I just, I was always great at starting, but never great at finishing. But one of the things that I think helped me is that I always liked to write. I never found writing being a chore. And especially when I finally went and I finished, see, when I had started my master's many years ago, but it was only back in, what was it now, 2016, 2017 is when I actually went and finished it. And at that time with the master's, I had now gotten into the habit of writing again. I was writing all kinds of research papers. And when I finished and got that master's, all of a sudden, at the, snap of the fingers, I no longer have things to write as like an assignment. So I just all of a sudden thought that, well, you know what? If I was ever going to finish something while it's still in my muscle memory, now's the time to keep writing. And I dusted off my old manuscript that I started, and I just went right through it, finished it, and I haven't stopped from that point
You haven't
on.
stopped.
No.
So like you love writing, right?
I
So
do.
then,
I do. I like writing. Yeah.
yeah. So were there like any situations that you had to face, like any problems you had to face where you had like a writer's block or something?
Oh, I
Where like
always have that.
always,
And I can't predict that. Where sometimes I'll just get on a roll, and I'll write for several days, and I'll almost finish a book, and then there'll be sometimes several weeks where I go to start, and I'm just I just don't feel like doing it today, and stop, and I can't predict and say what when is it gonna. It just all I don't know. It just happens. Sometimes I just get into that rhythm and keep going, and sometimes I don't. But I think it all equals out.
so again, all you said some of these stories are like part of your cases, right?
Hmm.
So then while you were writing those, like did you, I'm pretty sure you must have like reminisced your days, like
Sure.
you have thought of your memories. So at that time, did you feel like, oh my God, this is something that I really should have focused on? Or did you feel like, oh my, maybe literature is the right step for me and I should pursue this instead of, the police officer? Did you feel like you wanted to stop one thing and focus on the other, like solely?
Well, not so much focus solely, but one thing that I really wish I would have done is I wish I would have, like, at the time, I wish I would have thought about writing, because I wish I would have taken all kinds of notes when these incidents and events were happening, because it's one thing when something is, you remember the basics of when something happened. But I have found over and over again that, I'll talk to somebody who I used to work with, and at a certain time, and he or she will say something, and I'll say, that's right, I forgot all about that. And then it stirs the memory, and I remember everything about it. But there's probably so much that I could write about that I just don't remember. And I wish I had at the time been forward thinking enough to think about, at some point maybe I would write about this, and to just take basic notes of things that happened. And I think I would have at least double of the material that I've had so far.
So then, since you're writing about literally your life, is there like any fun or interesting story like you can maybe tell us?
Um, well, uh, let me think of one.
Like
They're
where you
all, I mean,
actually learned something as well, but it was also fun for you?
fun. Let me think of something that was fun that
Yeah,
I learned. That was in
that
it.
should
Um, Let me
probably
see.
could be like a case, or like it could be when you became a captain or something.
Well, I'll tell you just a brief case that I don't know if you consider this fun, but you learn something. You learn
You
something from
learned
everything.
something.
But again, with internal affairs, it was always, like any. I was drafted into internal affairs. You apply for an investigative assignment as a sergeant or lieutenant, and I was a lieutenant at the time. And the idea is, though, you're going to get drafted into internal affairs for 2 years, because internal affairs does not have a good reputation within the police department, within the members, because you're the unit that's going to be investigating other police officers. And
Mm.
nobody wants to be investigated, and nobody really wants to do that job. But the 2 years I was in there was the greatest learning experience I had. But one of the first cases I went out on was, the allegation was that there had been a sergeant that had burglarized somebody's apartment, a residential apartment. And when I went with a sergeant to interview that complainant, the alleged victim, and he seemed extremely credible on the phone when we were interviewing. He was an accountant. He was very lucid. He had a lot of details on the phone. When we went to interview him, and again, it starts off very, it seems like there's something to this. But he's up on, like, the had to be maybe at least the 15th or the 20th floor of a residential apartment building. And he then mentions about, just matter of factly, that sergeant got into his apartment last night. And I'm saying, he was here. He was here last night. And so, yeah, well, I said, how did he get in? And he says, no, he didn't come through the door. And to me, there's only one other way. There's a balcony, but we're up 15, 20 stories up. And he goes, no, he didn't come that way. And I'm like at a loss. So now I'm like, am I missing something? Because he didn't come through the door.
How did he come?
How did he get in here? And he just matter of fact, looks me in the eye and says, oh, he comes in my dreams. And at that point, it's like, well, what do you say to that? And it's like, okay, well, thank you very much. And we'll keep you abreast of any developments we get. And, and that's that,
So what happened after that? Did you tell your superiors? You're like, oh my God, this person was actually like, no, he comes in my dreams.
Oh, well, see, I wanted to end it right there. But the sergeant I was with, who turned out to be kind of more of a comedian than most were, he just got going at that point. He started asking questions. He says, okay, very seriously with, okay, sir, so please tell me, does he say anything? Does he float above you or anything? Does he, he just went on for about 20 minutes with these, and he was seriously answering the questions. Well, yes, he talks sometimes, and he tells me these things, and it was just, but you just closed the case out as being unfounded, and that it is what it is. You just put down that he, allegedly the subject appeared in dreams, and that's
yes.
that. Case closed.
Case closed. So then again, you're still working right now at the government. You're an author. You're writing books, many series. You're also a professor. What do you find common, something common that you find in each of these three, paths that you have taken simultaneously? What do you feel like, oh, I've seen this before here, you know what, I think I have to go with this here? What do you feel is more common?
The importance of detail, whether it is in teaching and making sure I've covered all the details, whether it's with the curriculum or whether it's administratively, at work here, paying attention to detail with what's going on here, and especially in writing with detail. One of the things that I've learned the hard way is how important it is to, detail with, not so much with, if I'm writing nonfiction, making sure that I'm historically accurate is one thing, or even in writing fiction, make sure I'm historically accurate, but also with the editing and not letting something get out there that's improperly formatted, improperly spaced. So the importance of paying close attention to detail in all of these areas is very important.
So then do you feel like sometimes you have, missed out on a few details? Do you feel?
Oh God, some of the first books that I published, I have some of the first versions of them, and I look at them now and I say, my Lord, how did I ever let this get out with some of the misspellings, the missed punctuation, the open spaces in there, and I say, I let that get through.
Yeah, how did that happen?
Yeah.
So what do you think has in store for you for the future?
It's a good question. I know I'm going to work for a few more years. Writing, I think, is something I'll do for as long as I'm able to write. And
yeah, I'm going to check up on these books.
By the way, I write under a pen name. It's Robert Bryan, Bryan.
Yes. Okay. So, thank you. Because I'm really into crimes and thrillers, so that's a good thing.
So I just hope I am able to for a good number of years just keep on writing.
So then keep on writing, and then what about the classes?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry with that. That was also one of the reasons why I not only do I like to teach, but I always looked at that as something that there was no real age limit on it. As long as I'm physically able, it's something I'd be able to do, and that's why I have no intent on, as long as a college will have me, I'm going to keep on teaching.
So then again, what do you teach again?
Right now, I'm teaching two different, well, not at the same time, but two different classes in physical security. There's a big computer security program in the university that I'm at. But however, like with all computer security, there's always going to be a physical security component. So I teach the physical security aspects.
So then definitely you'll feel that physical security is definitely and most it's very important in this
Oh,
world.
you're never going to be able to, as important
Yeah.
as information cybersecurity is, you're always going to have a physical security element, because it's not just like hacking into a system. It's, people sometimes are going to have to actually, infiltrate into past, physical security components. They're going to have to get over or under a fence. They're going to have to get through a door. They're going to have to come through a roof. They're going to have to defeat the access control system. So physical security is always going to be a part of security.
Yeah, this makes me think, was there any other case like this?
In your dream, with the person dreaming?
No, like more about like the cybersecurity. Was there any case?
Oh,
like
well,
that?
with Casey, see, I wasn't really doing I never really worked. See, here, like my job is security now, and I teach physical security. But with the police department, I never really had cases involving security. And at that time, cybersecurity was still in its infancy.
So then, now in all of your 3 stages of your life, which one do you think? Okay, I'm going to give you an option. If you had to choose one out of the 3 things you're doing that is working as chief security officer, or writing as an author, or teaching physical classes, which one would you choose as like the number one?
I probably would choose being like, if I had to go back and do it all over again and take a different track, I probably could have been very comfortably being a full-time tenured professor somewhere.
Oh, so you find that,
but again, see, that's a tough answer though, because the reason I am a professor right now is because I bring the experience of the other career with me. So I wouldn't have been able in this department with these courses and these type of courses, I wouldn't have been able to do them without the background that I bring to it. So that's kind of a tough question.
So then the first thing you would think of is your classes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really amazing. So then, as you said before, we learn from our mistakes. So then definitely as you mentioned before, you have made quite the mistakes in the past, like as the police officer. Then of course we make mistakes in life everywhere. So then, along with like the writing the books and the classes, do you think that do you feel like any of these mistakes will remain with you in a way, like you would keep being with you and you would never be able to forget it?
I don't know. I think there's mistakes that you make that stay with you, that hopefully you learn from them. And a lot of these have to do with, once I became a supervisor and then a manager, I think a lot of them have to do with how you deal with people and deal with subordinates, and how, maybe, I dealt with this situation one way. Maybe if I had to do it again, I wouldn't deal with it that way. Maybe I'd take a different approach to it. Those type of things is I hope I've learned from over the years.
So like you would basically do everything again.
Do everything again, but maybe, change, like, go by the credo. The one thing I always learned is that, and this I stay with, is you always, as it goes with subordinates, you always, praise in public and discipline in private. You never want to, you want to take, which sometimes is called a more enlightened approach to dealing with people, and always trying to, even when something negative is happening, you try to express it positively.
Mm. So, and this brings us to our last question of this fun segment. What would you think is the advice that you would give to other students or people who would want to pursue the career of like a police or want to be a police officer?
I would tell them to go for their dream. If somebody, I think that police officer though is something that a person really has to want to do.
Yeah, you
It's
have to
not
want.
something. It's not something that you just say, I just saw there was an opening and there was a test or whatever, and I'll take it. I think you have to really want to do
Yeah,
it.
you'd
And if
need
you
to have
do,
determination.
yeah, if you want to do it, I tell them go for it. Go for it. Pursue that dream and do whatever it takes. And also do your research, because the other thing that I have seen with people looking for a policing career is people get
Hmm.
disappointed, and they didn't have to be. Most, even nowadays, most police departments have some type of physical requirements. You have to have a certain eyesight capability. You have to have be free of certain physical impairments. And if you're, even though, of course, there are accommodations that should be made for everybody to be able to perform any job. But the fact of the matter is, if let's say you have to have 20/40 uncorrected vision to be a police officer in a certain department, if you don't have that, then you're just setting yourself up for a big a letdown if you're going. So nowadays, if you know that there's going to be some type of a problem with, let's say, something like eyesight, there's things you can do. You
Hmm.
can go if you want to, and you have the capabilities, get the LASIK surgery in order to correct the eyesight. But if there's something that's going to hold you back and it is correctable, do it, and
Do
don't
it.
get to the point where you're being told sorry, but you don't qualify. If there's a
Hmm.
certain educational requirement, do it, and don't all of a sudden at the last minute say, well, they told me I don't have enough college credit. So make
Yeah,
sure that you
research.
actually cover the bases to follow whatever dream it is.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So thank you so much for being here with us today and telling us more about your personal experiences and more about yourself. This is Welcome to the New World. Thank you so much for listening to us.
My pleasure.